Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a discussion on Tactics Ogre One Vision and why you should care. Okay, here's the deal. Recently I put out a poll trying to get a general idea for how folks were feeling about different entries in the series, trying to see if there's anything in particular that maybe I should be trying to explain a bit more, all of that kind of thing. And then lo and behold, immediately one step into this little project, we find out that 36% of the community doesn't know what One Vision is, and another 21% here thinks they can't play it. So we gotta have a little bit of a talk here, people, because if you don't know what One Vision is, you should. And you should care because it's basically the beating heart at the center of the Tactics Ogre community. Anytime you've ever seen a mod project, anytime you've seen a new technical discovery, anytime that you've seen just about anything new about Tactics Ogre, realistically, it started from the One Vision community. Many of the little discoveries that many of us didn't pay attention to, many of the little bugs and quirks and whatever else that we had no idea would ever be there, hell, even something as simple as the fact that 100% attack moves, or 100% accuracy rather, guarantees debuffs. We only found that out because of the One Vision mod. There was one particular patch ages ago in which they added in a basically like a 2% chance to insta-kill the cursed weapons, and was using a tremendous shot during a video. It was like, hey, look, you can instantly kill everything. And then upon further testing, it turned out, yeah, no, this was just a mechanic that nobody knew about that was core to the design that they never bothered telling anybody. So anyway, long story short, this is a mod that is it's been around for the better part of the last decade. It's honestly disingenuous to even call it a mod, because for those that were saying that they don't support mods, they don't support unofficial releases, this thing is, for all intents and purposes, about as officially sanctioned as a mod can be, considering that Reborn even has a reference to it in the form of the Dynast King's Mead just randomly changing to use the same sprite that it does. It was one of the first sprite changes, it's one of the most recognizable item changes that happened, and it just randomly got switched to the same color. I've spoken to folks on the corporate side who basically said, yeah, look, we can't officially confirm it, but like, yeah, people here have played it. So, long story short, this mod has been around for a while. It has a ton of folks that have been supporting it for a while, but that's the thing. That's the thing that makes One Vision special here, and what I'm going to try to explain to y'all here today is the fact that it's not just one person's vision. The name originally was just a reference to the Queen song One Vision, and actually that's why I jokingly call it fried chicken all the time, because ultimately the song about One Vision ends up being about fried chicken. The guy's just fantasizing about getting some lunch. But when it comes to every idea in this mod, while Rakes is there discovering new mechanics, Gibbed is discovering new things that the PSP can do, and we've got Sir Bags with the HD mod there, as well as countless other contributors from various forums over the years. Essentially, this mod, in many ways, is sort of the community edition, so to speak. It's essentially the version in which people typically come up with ideas, and Rakes is just there kind of sitting in the Discord like, you know what? That's a pretty neat thing. You know what? Give me a minute. Let me see what we can do with that. And we've gotten thousands of features this way. So to say that it's a simple overhaul or a simple change doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. If I were just to list every individual change from the PSP version, this video could be 80 hours long and we still wouldn't even be 10% done. There is so much new in this mod that it's not even funny. So let's go ahead and get into it proper. Okie dokie, let's go ahead and talk about what you can play this on. Just so you know, I will be making a whole separate technical breakdown over how to actually make the mod, how to make it work on basically everything, as well as additional quality of life features you can fiddle around with, changes to visuals, and what have you. But just so you know, as far as what it can play on, it'll still work on an original PSP, on a PlayStation Vita, which is how I personally play it most of the time, any emulation device that's capable of at least PSP. This includes stuff like the Steam Deck, or a hacked Switch, if that's kind of your thing there, and additionally smartphones and PC. Most folks will play this on smartphones, considering that it's literally just a drag and drop process to make it work there. The HD pack works exceptionally well on phones. And additionally, one thing that I want to point out is that the PPSSPP emulator has specifically had multiple patches in order to actually make the HD mod work with this amazing overhaul. So either way, that's kind of about that. I guess technically that's somewhat misleading. It's not directly for the overhaul itself, but for the HD pack to work with Tactics Ogre in general. But see the technical video for that. Let's go ahead and get into the mod proper. Alrighty, welcome everybody to Tactics Ogre One Vision. So I've oftentimes described this mod as sort of the perfected version of the PSP version, but to many that doesn't apparently mean the same thing to them as it does to me. So let me explain a little bit. Back when we had the original PSP version, one of the things that it did was that it took the original SNES game and it remade it with the intent to make it feel like a tabletop experience. So we had an absolutely insane amount of different kind of oddly specific skills and spells and whatever else, essentially all leaning into the simulation of the game there, trying to give you a lot of different toys to go and play around with, trying to give you a lot of kind of ideas that could potentially ferment in your mind for different kinds of builds that you could make. Now, the problem was this idea wasn't quite completed, and in fact, most of the mechanics that they didn't actually end up feeling, well, complete by the end of it. There ended up being a sort of meta when it came to things like longbows. There ended up being a lot of kind of emphasis towards simply ranged attacks, and a lot of the mechanics that were in there fell by the wayside. And so there were so many of these, in fact, that when Tactics Ogre Reborn ended up coming out, many didn't realize just how many things weren't there. And honestly, I've been making the argument ever since it came out that it really didn't matter that a lot of those things weren't there. Simply put, there was so much in PSP that went absolutely nowhere that there was never a sensible reason for somebody to officially try and remake all of that. Whether it's an entire trap mechanic that happens to allegedly scale off of ambient weather, whether it's an ambient weather mechanic that they didn't get to finish in that one, whether it's trajectory lines that are supposed to work with things like ranged weapons and spells and everything else in equal measure, like they do in Reborn, but instead kind of being a little bit weirdly distributed in that they only seem to work with ranged weapons in that version, but additionally also only affect those ranged weapons. So like they didn't work with spells, they didn't work with finishers. So there were a lot of things that, again, got half finished. And this is actually part of the reason that the Rogue never made it to Reborn. It was simply a class that had so many oddly specific mechanics that, frankly, there's no logical explanation aside from the fact that somebody clearly had some spite towards the developers on that team. Because when you're going and creating one individual unit that really doesn't bring much to the table aside from speed and stealing crafting materials, and you're going to go ahead and give them thousands of new drop tables to manage, that is ridiculous. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about how One Vision handled things. See, in One Vision's case, it looked into this absolute void of mechanics, and rather than saying, okay, look, we need to make this sane, we need to make it more manageable, granted, it did make everything more manageable, it did make everything more logical. In fact, the entire mod is ridiculously well managed as far as its logic and overall consistency. But it basically looked into that void, and instead of thinking, this is crazy, it thought, I can fix her. And that's where we wound up with this amazing mod. That every step of the way, somebody comes in saying, you know what, this seems kind of weird about the original. And instead of saying, this is my mod, I do it my way, Rakes was always sitting there like, you know what, that's a pretty solid point. I think we can maybe riff on that a little bit. Whether it's that day that I walked into the Discord and asked for one-handed spears, and now we wound up with 5 different categories of them. Whether it's those cases where folks were complaining that shields didn't have enough kind of identity after a little while, where they ended up getting a bit too kind of normalized. We ended up getting a ton of new types of shields. We ended up getting a ton of new types of armor. Like, one of the complaints people had about the original was that the kind of different types of armor didn't feel distinct. And sure enough, this essentially this version comes with a ton of distinctions for your different armor pieces, where every time that you go and you make a new unit, it feels right. It feels like their equipment is doing exactly what you want it to do. It feels like every little bit and piece on the field has something to contribute, has some kind of use case for it, and just feels right. Like, that's been the consistent thing from start to finish here, which I probably should point out that the mod isn't even, it's officially finished, it's just adding more features at this point. It's like, it is feature complete, it has everything that you could want, and they just keep adding new stuff, because why not, basically, you know? So let's go ahead and look at how some of these features develop. Like, let's say one day, somebody was taking a look at the dragons and they're like, look, they got these vestigial wings and stuff. It's super weird how this can't fly. I mean, it doesn't look like it would fly well. Can you make it kind of fly? And so they're like, you know what? I think we can do that. And so they gave it Liftoff, an ability that allows a dragon past the mid-game to effectively be able to fly temporarily during that turn. Or, for example, people really liked the idea of Siege, the old skill that allows you to pass through Rampart Aura at the cost of a movement, but because of that movement cost, nobody wanted to use it. But removing that movement cost was not only apparently mechanically not happening, but also just would basically make it a kind of dead brain decision. So they ended up going and giving us Opportunist, an ability that takes the old treasure finding ability from PSP and then combines it with the Siege thing, which is now renamed as Flank. So you temporarily can rush through a Rampart Aura, but you have to spend your action move as well as 20 TP to do it. Effectively, it's just a quick maneuver that they can do in that situation. And we're not talking just skills getting rebalanced here. We're talking the entire class. Every single class has been meticulously crafted from top to bottom and tested and tempered with the community input along the way in order to give it that unique feel. Every class, every single solitary one feels unique to play with, and they all feel good. Like they all just give you that oh hell yeah feeling after a little while. That's one of those reasons this mod is so beloved. Like let's say you end up getting your Spellblades, your Valkyries, things like that. It's like oh well they're very similar to before. They've got their old kind of MP specialization, but they still kept, for example, their HP specialization that was lost and reborn, where instead of just having infinite MP, instead they convert their TP bar to either HP or MP. They pick which one. Instead of simply being accurate, they have an ability called Fated Circle, in which they'll be able to give the old Vigorous attack ability in a targeted bubble around them. They can support somebody else, they can support themselves, but the reason that this is important is because, again, no changes made in a circle. They're able to guarantee secondary effects on basically every weapon. Every weapon's got something. Like, you remember how fun it was to discover those weapons that had those unique effects? You remember thinking, yeah, it kind of would have been cool if more had this? Every weapon is categorized and has some specific function to play in that regard. We'll get to that in a moment. Like just looking over them, for example, we have there was one patch that was just randomly inspired by a bunch of stuff from Final Fantasy VIII. So, for example, Lyndall is able to use a couple of unique gunblades with his new commando class. He's able to specialize in using grenade items better. He has and part of that also was Absorb MP. That Absorb MP and Leech both existed before, but neither one ended up getting used very often. Absorb MP was too situational. Leech was something that nobody would really go out of their way to use. So instead we have an ability to basically draw in MP from units nearby, and the restriction on targeting friendly units was taken away. So effectively, they're absorbing MP of spells that ends up hitting them, but additionally, if they ever run low on MP, they can absorb it from units nearby. Perhaps a knight isn't using their MP bar very much, they can borrow a little bit from their buddy. Let's say there's an enemy that's about to go heal. They can go make sure that that heal is denied and then attack him at the same time. This is the kind of strategic insano depth that happens like throughout this entire mod, to the point that, again, this is basically Tactics Ogre 8 just given a new story. Like, literally, all they have to do to make Tactics Ogre 8 is get Matsuno in the writing room, take the One Vision mechanics, we have ourselves a new Tactics Ogre. That's it. That's all they gotta do, because this thing feels entirely distinct and insanely in-depth with everything it can do. Now, on top of this, forget everything that you knew about the old spells, forget everything you knew about the old weapons, because now let's go ahead and talk about equipment and spells real quick. Again, surface glance here, because there's no way I could possibly explain all the new features in under 100 hours. And just so you're aware, this isn't a case that it's as overwhelming as it looks. See, when you actually begin, what you're really looking at is an equipment list that actually looks, in many ways, shorter than the other versions, where at the very first chapter of the game, you literally are just running robes, leather vests, and mail hauberks. You've got your cloth armor that's going to help for casters. It's going to give you solid elemental resistances. It's going to be good against certain types of weapons, but very weak versus piercing type weapons like arrows. We've got vests that are kind of the standard armor. They're going to give you good avoidance, they're going to give you decent health, decent defense, medium weight, good protection against a lot of things, less so versus slashing weapons. We've got mail hauberks that are going to be your heavy equivalent in this case, with a full weight of 12, with a decent defense, some extra health, and extra vitality, along with very solid protections versus basically everything except for Crush, which is a little lower. Now, you might notice a few things right then and there. Not only do the damage types in your weapons matter, but I mentioned categories, because these three categories continue on throughout the entire game. We have those three, Chapter 2 has these three, Chapter 3 has these three, Chapter 4 has these three, okay? Those are your standard variants. You have three types of standard armor that are going to consistently weigh the same and give you the same types of bonuses throughout the entire game. Both you and the AI are going to be using these standard pieces of equipment. They are directly, linearly upgraded in that way, but you might be thinking, wait, this is just linear upgrades. I don't come here for linear upgrades. That's the beauty of it. Because this isn't everything. That's just the basic armor. We have a lot of different side grades that are available to everything as well. So, for example, let's say you have your different helmet types, and this is where a lot of the kind of like magic of equipment ends up happening, because each of these kind of different pieces of equipment will specialize in different things. Let's say you're not hitting very well, something like a circlet might do the job in the early game. Later on, you might switch over to something like the sallet, and then later on something like the bourgeonette, essentially giving you defense and agility with a little bit of mind to protect you slightly versus that. But if somebody's looking for a bit more tankiness, they would probably want the resistance and hard armor values of something like the standard heavy helms over here. Or, let's say if they were somebody that's a bit more of a kind of range type, they have some that are going to specialize in, let's say, spellcasting gloves, you've got melee gloves, casting gloves, whatever else, or shooting gloves, I should say. But all of them are, again, as you notice, specifically tailored to specific jobs, and min-maxing these different pieces of equipment feels very good. It essentially creates a situation where every time you build a unit, you can know exactly what you're building towards, and it feels immediate. The overall feeling you're getting is immediately noticeable. When you have a unit with heavy armor, like this Valkyrie over here, she is tough as hell. Like, there's very few times I've ever seen this Valkyrie actually get knocked out in ways that weren't an intentional sacrifice, because this heavy armor protects her extremely well. Some of the only things that are actually bringing her down are going to be debuffs. And same thing with stuff like knights, where they're going to have enough armor built into their class, as well as with these pieces of equipment, that they can run things like, for example, one-handed swords with extended handles so that they can use them as a two-handed weapon. And this applies to every piece of equipment in the game. There will be modifications that you can do to your different pieces of gear as you go on. Like, for example, your heavy shield, instead of knocking a target backwards and protecting you, in this case, it will grant you steadfast. It will guarantee a stun on hit and will boost your ability to deflect things. Which brings me over to things like armor tailoring, which was a really fun late-game thing in Tactics Ogre PSP, but wasn't really as much of a thing in Reborn. Oftentimes you would just kind of forget about your equipment over time. So, like, let's say, for example, this monk over here, she equips a staff that's modified to assist with parrying, as well as her helmet also assists with parrying, meaning that she's actually been pretty consistently able to deflect away melee hits while running this staff. She's been able to make use of additional finishers and combat potential with this staff despite being a dedicated healer. And this, again, applies to everybody. Everyone's got new weapon types available. Everyone's got new little bits and pieces that they can play around with. Like, for example, this Amazon over here will specialize in double striking with a spear for whatever reason that actually helps. Honestly, I just thought this build was funny, so I figured, screw it, whatever. She's a beast tamer. I want an Amazon that stabs many things. So I just went ahead and did that. Or one day I decided to make a fairy that heals things with her blowgun. I've got a beast tamer over here that goes and inflicts fear on things, and also uses these greased boots over here to get in closer contact with octopi and recruit them to our team. Basically, every class, as I mentioned, feels unique. Every class feels like it's got cool stuff going on. Even things with, like, golems, you can unlock new cores for them so that you can respec them on the fly. So every fight, again, bear in mind that it isn't just your side that's rebalanced. Like, that seemed to be one of the main concerns that was coming out of a lot of the discussion there, that folks were seemingly assuming that it was literally just your side that got rebalanced for whatever reason. It's everything. I mentioned before that Rakes actually put in the work and went in and redid every single fight, every single timeline, post-game, like New Game Plus stuff, every variant. For those that didn't know about the different types of variants in this game, you basically have situations where, like, if you're in Whether you're in world mode, whether you're in New Game Plus mode, whether you're in high level mode, regular level mode, there's entirely different variations for like every single fight in the game, to a completely insane degree. It's why the rogue never made it to Reborn. You know, nobody needs those thousands of drop tables there. So effectively, every single fight has been custom redone to actually make use of the mechanics in this thing. It's, again, another one of those reasons that this feels unique. And additionally, on top of everything else, like on top of the fact that everything is already custom redone and whatever else, there's even additional loving touches that were given to everything that honestly I kind of wish I would have brought my rogue for here. Because not only did they go out of their way to give each and every single NPC stealable items that are appropriate for what they're trying to do, or, you know, their backstory or whatever else. Like, you'll find a lot of healing items on random mercenaries, but for example, you'll find better healing items on units that will have stuff like field alchemy on there. Or you'll have, for example, wizards that just happen to have a golden snitch from Harry Potter on them. Or there will be, you know, if you end up going and killing off Oz in his first possible encounter there, since he can't actually drop his unique axe there yet, he'll actually drop a ceremonial version that you can sell for money to the store. And it's these little details everywhere that are absolutely insane. Like, this mod, throughout that 7 years, he hasn't just been sitting around doing nothing. It's been lovingly touched up with a fine tooth, like the finest paintbrush you've ever seen. It's like little details everywhere, all throughout this dang thing. It's been updated like this for the better part of the last decade. And again, every time somebody had an idea for a new feature, it came in. Did you ever wonder why you couldn't buff monster units in the original game? It's because they're like, they could use buff skills, but it would buff everybody but themselves. That wasn't a balance thing. It was simply a case that they didn't actually, they didn't technically have a weapon equipped. They were attacking unarmed. So this meant that their buffs just couldn't apply to anything. So not only will the AI actually come in with things like throwing boulders that allow them to actually, you know, throw those rocks that they could already do on your end. Instead, we have situations where the AI will actually throw rocks at you intentionally instead of just as a counterattack. We've got cases where they'll end up actually end up going and being able to buff their attacks, to have additional effects on there, to, for example, train up their elements through instills. Like if you threw a Crystallos at them, which is just a thing you can do now, they would have access to those buffs. They would be able to train their elements in that particular way. And like, it's this way in every direction, right? Every class has been lovingly touched up in a way that makes sense. Like, you may have potentially looked at Warlocks and thought, you know what, this guy kind of looks like a bard. Yeah, they can use instruments now. Or you liked the swords from Knight of Lotus. Yeah, they can use all kinds of lightweight swords. Perhaps you thought, you know, it's kind of weird how healing doesn't scale with mind. Yeah, it can do that here. Perhaps you thought, you know what, it's weird how they've got like eases and dispels and intimidates and whatever else. There's so many different versions of all these different abilities. Why don't they, like, why doesn't this kind of stick around in a place where I want it? I want it to be more intuitive. And so, for example, dispel is a good example of what we see all throughout this mod, of a lot of different abilities that were given not only a direct active effect, but were also given a sort of defensive or support component as well. So, like in the case of Dispel, it's a combination of what used to be Ease, what used to be Intimidate, as well as a few other things, where it'll get rid of your debuffs, it'll get rid of enemy buffs, as well as enemy ready to skills. Let's say, did I bring the right guy? No, this is my glaive guy. It's like, let's say you're always thinking, like, man, it's a pretty fun build how you can do Terrifying Impact on a spear for your Terror Knight Denim, or rather your Lord Denim there. Like, why can't I just give a spear to these guys that look like they'd be comfortable using a poleaxe or something? Sure enough, here they can. You know, maybe you wanted extended range bows, maybe you wanted shorter, lighter bows, maybe you wanted to be able to use stunning and silencing arrows on your archers. Maybe you wanted the AI to be able to use those things too. They absolutely can. And this actually is another kind of meticulous aspect of this mod, in which they made sure that every single class did actually have access to Do I have his skill available? No, I don't. Um, they made sure through extensive testing of every ability and everything else in here that when let's say when a unit is going and using an ability, like a AI unit, that they are actually fully able to actually use all of their abilities. So, like, let's say those instill abilities I was talking about earlier, that originally the AI wasn't capable of using them, and they got around that in Reborn by just making them automatic. In this case, what they did was that they actually combined them in a different way with a new type of spell tree there that allowed them to actually function. Let's say you had cases where you wanted to have kind of logistical harassment units, right? And you wanted to be able to, let's say, have a unit that just slowed others down. But aside from the slow debuff, or for example, something like Dark Weight, you may not necessarily have that option available to you. Which is why, in this case, you've got things like, for example, the side-graded axes, like you saw earlier, that Canopus is running, where it'll slow them down slightly on impact. This means that when they're, for example, sitting and being an evasion tank, it allows them to slow down enemies nearby them. But they also keep a secondary dagger on hand to roll for a chance to silence something if they happen to have the opportunity to do so. Did it ever bother you that you had a chance to inflict a debuff but had no guarantee with your finishers? In this case, every finisher is guaranteed. Every finisher has an assigned element, and all of them will respect their relevant kind of damage types. So that stuff tends to actually matter. So, for example, when we have things like glaives, they're going to be giving us the ability to have slash damage on a spear. That actually tends to matter versus different types of armor. Did you ever wonder, for example, why you couldn't do the whole D&D thing about being able to use more traversal abilities on your people? Well, you know what? Wind wizards and warlocks and whatever else, they can just go ahead and make somebody fly. They can go ahead and, let's say, add different movement types to different units. Things like, for example, adding a water defense buff to a unit that's on water will also cause them to be able to walk on the water because they are now hydrophobic. That is really freaking cool. And all of this, again, constantly had these sort of like halfway backtracks that ended up happening, where, for example, early on, there were a lot of different categories of shields that were added, right? And when those new categories were added, I remember I had a feeling, and I even mentioned this in videos, of like, you know what? These shields all kind of feel very normalized now. Like, I kind of miss the weirdly specific ward shields and things like that that happened back in PSP. You know, it's like one of those things that I bitched about extensively when Reborn came out, of like, where's all my unique shields, dang it. But yeah, sure enough, they ended up adding a huge variety of different features to different shields when that ended up happening. So essentially, whatever strategic options you'd like, they're going to be here in this mod. Whatever you think is a concern, I guarantee you somebody's had that concern before, and they've probably addressed it. Did you, for example, always want the option to have, let's say, like a dragon that was able to cast basic spells with the light and dark dragons? Yeah, you can do that here. Did you want to be able to use your instills whenever you'd like, just like the automatics in Reborn? This did it about 4 years earlier. Did you, for example, want to pay attention to things like footing a lot more often? Accuracy has been fine-tuned to absolute perfection in this version, to the point that the stuff that you're standing on, the accuracy buffs that you use, and things like, for example, trajectory, which I mentioned earlier, matter quite a bit. And what I was mentioning earlier about those backtracks, I actually only remembered because of Hobrim here, is that when it comes to all of these features, one of them was, for example, Hobrim, because when it came to the Swordmaster, the first thought that a lot of folks had was, well, you know, it's kind of weird how the Swordmaster is basically a master of one specific type of sword and not all of them, so what gives with that? So they were given all types of swords. They were given daggers, they were given Western swords, Eastern swords, of one- and two-handed varieties, multiple different variations of those types of swords. And essentially, this felt amazing. They were given the old defensive ability that was given to the ninja in PSP for some reason. And ultimately, swapping the ninja and swordmaster abilities felt really good, so that change ended up sticking. But ultimately, what ends up coming out of all this is that folks are looking at Hobrim, and suddenly the nostalgia hits of like, you know, I miss how he used to be. I miss how he had this one goofy type of sword. It wasn't very good, but it felt unique. It felt special. But honestly, no one gave a crap for any other unit outside of Hobrim. So, in comes the Blade Knight, who interestingly enough can use very similar armor types to the PSP version. He's limited to a two-handed katana, and additionally has a lot of new tricks, like you saw earlier, that he's able to essentially utilize his MP bar for a lot of different types of attacks. Since he would be extremely limited without a long-range attack here compared with the others, he gets, just like the regular Swordmaster, a stunning throwing rock, like from Knight of Lotus. He gets access to these kind of MP chucking abilities with things like Ghost Plate or what have you, where he's able to project his sword out a decent distance depending on how much he's charged up his MP bar. He's able to use that MP bar to then go and deliver one big massive double hit, more or less. And the thing is, this keeps on getting more and more extensive the more you look at it. Like, for example, with that double hit, there was a funny glitch that could happen back in the PSP version if you stacked enough bonuses on top of something, in which a target that was given 3 hit splats or more would basically just disappear if they died. That they just sort of faded out of existence, and frankly, everyone always found this funny. It's one of those harmless, technically it's a bug, but honestly, who gives a damn kind of situations. Because it was endearing. It was like, man, that guy hit so hard he got freaking vaporized from existence. And sure enough, that bug was not simply just removed. I mean, technically there's ways to still accomplish it, but it was effectively kept in for the Blade Knight, where that will actually trigger at the end of his ability if he kills with the first strike of his double strike, that the second magical swing will vaporize somebody from existence. It's one of those, there's no practical reason to do it, but it's just cool that it's there. We get access to new types of classes if you're playing well. Things like pickpocketing Nybeth to get access to a Necromancer back in Chapter 1. You get access to new Necromancy drops if you decide to go after ghosts in that section. Again, giving you more stuff to play through if you've already played through it before. And every class is, again, like this. Like you saw this ninja earlier, it's a really cool touch to me that, for example, with their spells, technically, there's an entire separate summoner class that can do all kinds of different summoning abilities, but all of these were redone not just as the elemental different one, but essentially as something that actually matches the animal used. Like Agumo here is the spider, and rather than simply being a the earth thing and it shoots some rocks, what it does is it shoots down pointy rocks that typically will hit 2 times with a poisonous spike. Effectively, it's the god of frickin' spiders going and poison biting something. Or the Kamatachi here is going to essentially be a series of mini tornadoes that feels very similar to the Heaven and Hell spells from Final Fantasy Tactics. Or, for example, we have Deadlock here that's basically just bringing in the reborn version of Shadowbind, with the original Shadowbind still here. We have, for example, additional features that were actually added to a lot of buffs, like the original, let's say, original movement items back in PSP. These were made automatic in Reborn, by the way, but the original movement items in PSP had to be activated, and that was a hard limit that couldn't be gotten around. So instead, just like many other things that were hard limits that couldn't be gotten around, it became a feature instead. Where they actually, where, for example, Amphibia here will make them more resilient, on top of having Water Walk. That, in combination with his ward shield over here, means that when he's walking on water, he's functionally immune to spells now. And hell, that even circles back around yet again to magic, because when it comes to magic, all of it feels different. You already saw a lot of the new spells in action, but for example, the draconic spells, making use of your primary weapon means that they're able to penetrate defenses. Oh, excuse me, that was a weird whatever that was. You've got access to just new spell types that you didn't have before or wouldn't have considered before. Like for a while I was running Soul Spark on him with the fire element. Just allowing him to give Mighty Strike to somebody, so if he were, for example, to use Mighty Strike in conjunction with his instrument, which has a chance to charm whenever you're playing it for somebody, this effectively means that he would have a guaranteed charm hammer, more or less. And again, whatever you're thinking, whatever little thing you're going to bring up as a gripe in the comments, I guarantee you somebody has thought of it before, and yes, it was changed in the mod to make sure that everybody was happy with it. Again, it's democracy in action. It is a beautiful thing. Like, even the octopus here is one of my favorite things in this mod because, in its case, like, everything was retooled to make it feel incredible. You may notice no aqua veil. This guy does need a water tile to function. At the same time, you land a blue spiral on something, it's 7 tiles. Like, you empower this guy, right? It's 7 tiles of basically watery death. You end up getting a bunch of units kind of trapped together between a golem and a knight. Put them next to your octopus by the river. Go ahead and throw in something like a maelstrom or something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to wind up not making it back from that particular water party. It's a really, really fun time. Like, this is one of those games that, yes, the battles are slower, but honestly, I personally play this on original speed because they're slower, but they're so meaty. Like, it's the kind of thing where, yes, you'll spend an hour on a battle, but good God, it is going to give you some special feelings that entire time. It's going to give you something interesting throughout that entire experience. And I should probably point out that things weren't simply remade as they were before. If there's guaranteed drops of some kind, like, for example, if we go into Farampa Wildwood in Chapter 4, right? Over here in the deep woods, like this area, can get incredibly difficult to actually get through. This is a proper difficult dungeon to actually try and clear. But there's a lot of unique drops if you manage to get to the far ends of it. Like, for example, there's a class called the Sacred Fist, as well as a unique weapon called the God Hand that you can get at the same time. That you can get access to partway through this forest. That's basically a kind of unarmed specialist of sorts. We've got... Oh man, it's just like every new feature is another feature, another feature. It's just, it never ends. Anyways, like, you've got unique classes that are parsed out in different areas. Again, drops are guaranteed. If there's anything you like, if you are worried about having to grind for a particular thing, those guaranteed drops are always guaranteed in the places that drop them. If you're worried about crafts failing like they did in PSP, those are also guaranteed. If you're wondering about needing to go level up a whole bunch, that's one of those funny tricks that this mod actually pulls. Leveling up doesn't actually help you in a lot of situations. See, your base stats, they don't really go up. Not naturally anyway. Leveling up does not raise your character's base stats. It raises the class level, sure, but generally speaking, you want to keep everything roughly equal. Because as you're kind of going up through the game, you'll notice mostly what leveling up gives you is the opportunity to go spend more time going and upgrading your equipment. It does give you new pieces of gear every now and then, and it does give you new skills. However, your good play and thinking through the tools that you have on hand, that's what really matters here. That's the kind of stuff that really makes this thing shine. The many different pieces of equipment, many different types of builds that you can do. I should probably point out that you have basically no advantages over the AI directly in terms of, for example, being able to spam your way through with revives. It will actually make you play the game just like Reborn does in a different way. It's one of the things I praise about Reborn, it's one of the things I'm praising here, that both of them make you actually learn the game. You can't simply spam revives and just easily get a win throughout the entire thing. Now, this makes it sound a lot more difficult, but it is really, really satisfying to finally understand those mechanics and finally understand why stuff is happening. Like, it's just a mechanical, just like, systemgasm that you really don't get that often in, frankly, much of anything. Like, I have not seen any mod or kind of rework of a game that gets as in-depth and complex as One Vision does. Quite frankly, I've oftentimes compared it to XCOM Long War. I don't think XCOM Long War gets this deep, and I think this one is drastically easier to understand. It's incredible. Like, frankly, from top to bottom, it is an incredible just masterpiece. Every piece has been fine-tuned to such a degree that it feels just right. Anytime that you've ever had a thought in Tactics Ogre of, well, I guess it just kind of is what it is, here it isn't what it is. Here it is fixed. Whatever it was. However it was. It's exactly how you probably wanted it to be the whole time. So either way, that's kind of where we stand on that. This mod is absolutely incredible. I'm trying to think how I can possibly explain more of it without necessarily getting into too deep of spoilers. But lastly, for those folks that were just worried about being overwhelmed, while there are quite a few new mechanics and everything else here, it uses all of the existing mechanics that you probably already know in a more interesting way. So it's not simply all just new stuff you got to learn all the time. Everything is going to be a lot more familiar than you're thinking. And if you're familiar with Reborn, essentially you're going to see a hell of a lot of situations where the bars themselves are actually way more, like the skill bars, I should say, are way more similar to Reborn than they are the original PSP version, giving you a lot more impact per action. As I mentioned before, this means that we're going to see a lot more kind of situations where things are used in multiple situations. So, like, for example, something like Shell Bust, an ability that's available over on the White Knight there, is an ability that not only allows them to break defenses of a unit before they attack them, but additionally allows them to break out of their shell, so to speak, being able to potentially have a chance to shake off their debuffs when it's used. Or potentially something like Eagle Eye is something that's going to be useful for making your rookies land their shots, but at the same time, it's also going to be really good defensively, giving you sidestep as well. So this means that every unit type will have something new to it. It'll have something new to potentially think about, something new to play around with. It's fine-tuned to an absolutely ridiculous degree. You definitely don't know just how many things were actually worked in here until you've gone and tried it for yourself. Like, until you've actually seen these mechanics in play yourself, until you've gone and done an entire playthrough on your own. And if you ever feel overwhelmed, please feel free to ask any questions here. I'm going to start on a series of kind of beginner guides for One Vision here to help folks out. To try to get y'all into this whole thing, because this is a mod that I feel every Tactics Ogre fan should try, because it's more than just a mod. It is, again, basically the beating heart of the community in many ways. It's basically where we get a lot of this, not even a lot of, most of the stuff that we get from modding projects, most of the stuff that we see in terms of new discoveries and whatever else originated from here, and the passion in this mod. Essentially, it's something that you really need to experience for yourself. And it's something that you really should experience for yourself, because it's, again, it's not just a mod, it's special. It's very unique. It's One Vision, and its name became more and more accurate over time. That it is the kind of collective vision of what the community always wanted in a Tactics Ogre, but maybe didn't always necessarily get. There's obviously a lot more to cover than what I've covered here, and while this is the prettiest version that I'm showing you right now, again, most of y'all I would expect would actually be playing this on your phones when it comes down to it. Oh, actually, one more thing I didn't mention is that, technically speaking, if a unit gets downed, you actually have to sacrifice somebody else to get them back up on their feet. Like, you have to essentially evacuate a unit. You have to sacrifice a unit to get one of your units back. Again, that's one of those little changes that feels like that to some might feel scary, but it leads to this really fun consolidation in a lot of fights that you really got to just feel out. But more on that in the beginning video, and as far as getting the mod set up for those that are going to get into it, see more of that in the technical video. So thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.